Welcome back, folks, to another great episode of the Redbelly Insights podcast. I'm your host, Mark Monfort, and I am joined with a very special guest here, Matt Hale of the product team. Matt, how's it going?
Good, thanks, Mark. Yeah, great to be here.
Fantastic. Before we get into it, and this is an interesting one because people have been, the Red Belly community is great. They've been doing the digging. They've, seen that. Oh, we've got we've got product people. Let's let's find out more about them. So perfect timing with this. But before we go on, folks, I just do have to read you a disclaimer. As always, this podcast is for informational purposes only. Redbelly Network is a blockchain infrastructure provider and does not endorse or promote any financial products or investment opportunities. All opinions expressed are those of the speakers. Please do your own research and comply with applicable laws in your jurisdiction. I will get much better at that. It'll roll off the tongue in future episodes. But before we get into it, we had a great couple of episodes, the last two with Vincent, showcasing what he presented over on the Gold Coast as part of a presentation with Deca. And it was all about what agents and how blockchain can help, doing that with Google. And then Vincent was kind enough to actually get into more details of that in a deeper dive last week. So now we're following up with Matt from the product team. But before we get into it, Matt, can you tell us a little bit of background about yourself? How did you get involved with Web3 and Redbelly?
Wow, yeah, thanks, Mark. My journey into Web3 has been a long and meandering one. It started back in 2016, I would say. I was just coming out of university at the time, University of New South Wales here in Sydney, and I'd been running in a competition to figure out how we might tackle climate change on campus. And this was a competition run by one of the innovation centers there. And my idea for this competition was to try to do some peer-to-peer energy sharing or solar energy sharing between some of the homes that surround our campus. There's quite a large sort of solar density in that area. And I wanted to share that excess solar with the campus, which obviously as a university campus has a lot of excess, or rather a high energy demand. And so I was looking for ways to try to make this idea a reality. And I'd heard about a talk on campus that was to do with Bitcoin. And I was like, what is this magic internet money sort of thing all about? It sounded like too good to be true almost. And so I went along to this talk and came away scratching my head with more questions than I had answers. But I did go down the rabbit hole of figuring out, Bitcoin's not the only thing in the space anymore. There's this new kid on the block called Ethereum that everybody was sort of getting very excited about, and the promise of smart contracts. And this was really something that piqued my interest. And so I just went down the rabbit hole in the Ethereum community here in Sydney for a couple of years, which is where I met some of the guys from Block 8, which is a blockchain venture studio here in Sydney, which has eventually morphed into the Redbelly team. So I started working at Block 8 a few years later, in about 2018. My peer-to-peer solar sharing venture didn't quite work out, but that's all good. I managed to get a job at Block 8 out of it, which was great. And I worked with the Block 8 team for a couple of years, and then I was part of the founding team, I suppose, on Redbelly, coming in almost 4 years ago now to start working on the project in a product capacity.
That's fantastic. I think it's really interesting that, it's not just that you guys like yourself, Tim, Alan, Vincent, everyone in the team have all come from different backgrounds, working together, maybe coming from different areas. It was really interesting that, going from a venture studio and where you typically would work on other people's projects, maybe start a few of your own, and turning that into the sole focus being one of those like projects and turning it into the great thing that we're seeing with all the potential here. But what sparked your interest really in product development? Does it go back to that solar idea, or was it well before that, do you think?
Yeah, no, it does. I think you're spot on. It does go back to that point in time. I was coming out of university. I did my honors in climate science, and I was sort of exploring the path of going down the academic route to do a PhD or to just become, a career researcher. I was working as a research assistant at the time, and I came to the conclusion, I was like, there's a lot of great people working on trying to understand this problem in a lot of detail, but I really wanted to try to move into working towards solving the problem. Like, what can I do to actually solve the issue that we understood very, very well ad nauseum at that point, even more so now. And so that sort of led me down this path of, okay, what ideas do I have, innovative ideas that we could work on to try to help solve the problem? So that was sort of the genesis of my, I guess, product thinking. Most universities these days don't have formal training in product management necessarily as a discipline, but I'd also done a diploma of innovation management at the University of New South Wales as well, alongside my core degree. So I'd had a bit of exposure to entrepreneurship as sort of a discipline in the business school there. And so I guess that coming together with this desire to problem solve really started my journey on product management. And I think that's one of the key things about working in product is you've got to be obsessed with problems. Being obsessed with problems is probably the defining characteristic, more so than loving technology, more so than any one particular kind of technology or technological solution. You really need to be focused on solving problems, and that's going to set you up for success.
Yeah, that sounds like I mean you're crossing over into the next section the next question I had, which is like how did the work in research and startups as you were kind of like shape your approach to Redbelly? But I think obsession is definitely a key part of it. Was there anything like else that you think has helped shape your approach to product over at Redbelly?
Well, I do think I guess some background in research in particular has been definitely helpful. So in product management, we always try to de-risk our assumptions through testing the market, and having a sort of strong basis in research methodologies, and being inquisitive and I suppose oriented around the scientific method sort of approach. I mean, products by no means a science in that respect, but sort of being rigorous and trying to test your assumptions and understand when you are making assumptions and when those do need to be tested is really important. So I think that definitely helped as well.
I think it's really interesting the mix that you say, and I've just thought because I see a lot of value, especially as we're coming to this crossover, this turning point, like where eventually I see a future where more businesses are on blockchain, and you look silly to not be on blockchain for certain things, right? But we're getting to that crossing point, or tipping point, or whatever people call it. But the ones that do well in this current era, both before, during, and after, are the ones that have TradFi and DeFi and crypto experience. Now, what you said there is really interesting. From product perspective, you typically don't see people, or that I've seen anyway, that have a research background as well. It's either research or it's product. I think it's interesting that you got both, because there's a respect for both sides, because you could be completely product as a founder and just be overly obsessed and not even look at any of the research and take a step back and just create tens of different products that in my past I've done without really validating and stuff. So I think that's interesting. Going back to Redbelly, what pulled you into the blockchain space? Like you mentioned seeing Ethereum and hearing about this fancy internet money. I also took that view back
Yeah.
then. But what really was it the work that you were doing at Block 8? I mean, you mentioned like the startup and stuff, and the climate side of things, and solar. What were these kind of marking points that really pulled you in?
Well, I think being I went really deep into the Ethereum community. I was going to every single meetup that I could, just to be a sponge and absorb as much information as I could, and meeting a lot of incredibly smart people from all sort of disciplines that were all kind of congregating around really the potential of the technology. And I think particularly in those days, 2016, 2017, even into 2018, like even as the ICO boom was sort of like, coming into effect, I suppose, and a lot of people were kind of getting caught up in a lot of the the financial aspects of the technology or the opportunities afforded by the technology, there's still a really strong core group of people who were rallying behind the potential of the technology to really disrupt the ways in which we organize economic life in society. And these themes have been building for a very long time in throughout around the world in terms of inequality and just a mistrust or distrust of institutions, or institutions not working as they should for the average sort of person. And I think the promise of the technology to be able to automate away a lot of inefficiency and open up access to these wealth generating opportunities to the average person is really what was strongly motivating to lean heavily into the technology. So for me, it became more broad than just a particular problem necessarily. It was the technology is so general purpose at an infrastructure layer that to sort of try to step back and see the broad applicability and the disruptive potential of the technology was what really, I think, drew me in and made me want to lean harder into especially the Redbelly opportunity, which doesn't come along every day, and it's a general purpose infrastructure to try to make some of these visions a reality. So that's definitely what sort of motivated me to lean in more.
Yeah, it's definitely a great opportunity to we see all these like different blockchains out there, and especially with Redbelly, the uniqueness to it and what it is really fit for purpose for. There is no one great blockchain at everything. Like, all have their nuances and stuff, and what we're aiming for here with tokenization. Certainly Redbelly fits the bill there. What is your, as head of product, what does your day-to-day sort of look like?
Yeah, great question. One thing I really love about product management, and something that sort of has kept me coming back for more, if you like, is just how varied the day-to-day can be of the job. Product is quite a generalized discipline. It touches a lot of different areas, and so that gives you the opportunity to do many different kinds of things. So on one day, you might be stuck in the weeds writing a white paper or a product strategy or a vision sort of statement. So you're getting quite a 50,000 foot sort of view of the market, of the theoretical underpinnings of the technology and what you're trying to achieve with it. And other days you might be out talking to customers. So we might spend a couple of hours talking to a customer about their specific problems in their industry or in their specific use case, and how we might be able to solve those problems for them in a new and different way that they'd never thought about before. You might also spend some time talking with the community on a day-to-day basis, or talking to people from the community about their experience of the network as, say, that more of an investor lens as well, which is really, really important. Other than that, we work closely as product people. We work very closely with the development team as well, so the engineers that are actually cutting the code. And that's really to ensure alignment between the execution of the product strategy and the product vision. So we might write some user stories and groom them with the team to make sure that the requirements are understood. We might write requirements documents, which sort of aggregate features together at a higher level and define the feature set in a way that can be worked on alongside say a product designer or a solution architect, a team lead or a head engineer as well, to really shape that solution. And then the other big theme, I think, of a day-to-day would be, I've touched on this in terms of talking to customers, but is really de-risking your assumptions. So there's always the three lenses of de-risking that we like to take care of with product management, which is our desirability lens, which is anybody going to care about using your product, or does it actually solve a problem for them in a way that's desirable? A viability lens, which is, does it work for the business? So is it compliant? Is it legal? Does it actually make money, or is it cost effective to run this solution based on your infrastructure costs, for example? So that would be viability. And then feasibility, which is definitely the engineer's favorite for sure, and that's testing whether we can actually technically build these pie in the sky sort of ideas that as product people we love to come up with new solutions and new ways of solving problems, but often the engineers like to test how far we can actually take those ideas, and sometimes they've got to bring us back down to earth as well. So a lot of collaboration, a lot of talking to different stakeholders, and a lot of hands-on work as well with the technology too, which I love.
It's definitely a juggling act. I can imagine with this sort of stuff. I've been in a software company before where it literally was that it was engineers in like the one room across like a large floor in a Melbourne company office and stuff. Sales where I was in on the one side, bit of product and stuff there because we're talking to customers and relaying that information back and saying things in these meetings where engineers go, no, you cannot say that kind of thing. But appreciating it now because I've been on both sides. Like I build AI tools and products. Arturo, my colleague, is building in the smart contract space, and we wear these different hats. But with all of that, like you balance like research and product. How do you balance like technical depth with user needs and I guess you could say partner priorities?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I think the right answer there does depend on kind of what stage the product company is at, the company that you're working at is at. So, for example, when you have before you reach product market fit, which is the stage of business that Redbelly as an organization is at the moment, before you get product market fit, most of your time and attention should be laser focused on trying to find that product market fit. So what that means is you need to be you need to be indexing heavily on customers and customer needs. You've got to make sure that whatever it is that you're building, that it's solving a core part of a problem that's very painful for your customers. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter how good the technology is that you're building. If nobody's going to use it, then you're not going to find product market fit. And that's really just an analogy for traction. So you want adoption of your technology in order to, especially as a blockchain network, to sort of drive the fundamentals of the token economics and velocity that you need to move the network in the right direction that you want to go. So that would mean probably spending about 70% of your time or so working on either new features or like quickly iterating on features that you've already built, regardless of their level of technical complexity necessarily, but focusing specifically on the problems that you're solving for a customer. So if that's like an onboarding pain point, which is something a lot of our customers have faced when they come and talk to us, because Web3 is a challenging thing for their traditionally Web2 users to sort of adopt and understand and take on. So that might be where you need to focus most of your time and energy. Now, that being said, as you've said, you've got to balance these things quite carefully. So you do need, especially for Redbelly as a blockchain network, the thing doesn't work if you don't have nodes that are running the software, running the SEVM or the EVM, the virtual machine, and the consensus. Literally, the thing doesn't hang together. So for a while, we did need to index heavily on spending a lot of time taking the IP that we got out of the research lab with Vincent and turning that into a production sort of grade system that we were able to launch, so that we could then offer our products and services on top of that infrastructure to our customers. So that was sort of like earning the right to build products on top of this infrastructure at the first instance. And then in a more day-to-day sort of sense, you do need to balance the need for things like tech debt and maintenance and security and things like that, which are all very important. So you've got to be, as a product person in particular, working closely with the engineers, you've got to constantly make these balanced decisions in order to make sure you're threading the needle as best you can in terms of driving things forwards. And maybe the last thing I'd say on that question would be, at the deep technical sort of core infrastructure layer, it does take a lot of time and effort to make changes at that level, because the impact and the complexity at that level is quite large because of the distributed nature of the system, and just even rolling out a new binary across all the nodes and things is a fairly complex process. And so you've got to be balancing that as well when you are considering your releases that impact the infrastructure layer.
I think definitely you've been very good at juggling early on in your career, and that continues as you become a master juggler of all of these things that need to be balanced there. And the really interesting part was, as you mentioned, understanding the problem. I think that's a really good guiding principle amongst like the many there. Now let's get into building Redbelly behind the scenes, you could say, because that's what this series is sometimes about. Like, it's behind the scenes, it's also highlighting partners, it's highlighting projects that we'll see come to reality. But what's been that process of evolving Redbelly, let's say, from concept to reality? What's that been like?
It's been a long journey, that's for sure. And it's been a great and very rewarding one for myself. We first started talking about Redbelly and what we wanted to do with it back when we were still working on at Block 8 and working on various customer projects and client projects, which each had their own use case for the technology, and trying to apply the technology in their own specific way in their specific industry, which was both Web3 focused clients, like pure DeFi sort of customers, as well as some more traditional industries or Web2 kind of customers that we were trying to get to adopt the technology. And so the process really started with thinking through, okay, if we were to have our own layer one network, which is what we were working on in terms of creating the joint venture and getting the IP out of the university environment, so that we could commercialize it. If we were going to be successful there, what is the answer to the question, like, why blockchain? Why should blockchain be useful in the world, and where is it going to make the most impact? And so this was a very core question that we spent a lot of time on as a business, sort of thinking through the best application for the technology for us, both in terms of the trying to match the core capabilities of the technology, but to that real world problem that we wanted to solve. And we spent many months sort of going back and forth and ideating different strategies that we could take the technology down. And where we landed was we saw that the biggest opportunity for the technology was not to try to build a financial system that exists independently of the real world, which is in our views kind of like how typical blockchain companies have approached things historically. At least we were seeing a trend towards real world assets quite heavily now, but historically it's been, we're going to build Web3 assets that exist outside the rules of regulation and the rule of law, and we're just going to try to let them regulate us, sort of thing. You know what I mean? And whereas we looked at sort of the amount of assets, the trillions of dollars worth of assets that already exist in financial markets, and that some of our customers were working quite heavily with, and because we had that direct exposure to those projects from the venture studio point of view at Block 8, we're able to see the applicability of the technology across a wide range of these existing industries, and that a lot of the problems that exist, say in finance or in real estate or in construction or in even infrastructure assets or energy assets, that kind of thing, they're very similar. I mean, they each have their own unique flavor of problems, but a lot of the inefficiencies are kind of stem from similar places and similar things. And so a lot of that really drove us to, okay, we need to focus the technology. We can't be everyone's your best solution for every problem. That's a recipe for disaster, we thought. So we made a very strategic decision early on to be laser focused on real world assets, assets that are not necessarily Web3 native, but rather applying the technology as best we can to remove as much inefficiency as we can in those existing workflows, to really bring those assets into the 21st century and make them more available to your average person. So I hope I've answered your question there. I'm not sure.
No, I think you have. Like, there's definitely like a lot of morsels, many morsels of insights from all of this so far. And for folks that are just joining us, we've had a great bit of background into the juggling career that Matt has had. I don't know if you can juggle literally or just figuratively, but it's certainly a talent there, it seems.
I appreciate that. I did try to juggle once as a kid, but with no
At
success.
you, I went to UNSW too, probably many years before you did. I'm a little bit older, but I do remember it was like hacky sack in front of the library, as well as like people doing flame throwing juggling in the evenings as practice, which was a fun thing to watch. But just going back to it, from what you said there about like the behind the scenes type stuff, which is just what we've covered. What would you say? A two-part question here. What would you say has say surprised you the most about working with partners in the space? And then secondly, are there things that you think that people don't really see or understand when it comes to launching infrastructure like this?
Yeah, definitely. So the first part of the question with respect to partners, I think something that's really surprised me in working with a lot of these companies that are often quite well established in the traditional financial system is just how much regulation is a matter of interpretation for these customers. And so I sort of naively went into, I don't have a background in TradFi, right? But when I sort of came to get quite close to a couple of these different assets, um, and you sort of see I kind of naively expected the rules in legislation and in the regulation to be quite concrete and quite like prescriptive in a sense. And in some senses they are, but it's really a matter of interpretation. And so what I've found is that a lot of partners and customers, they will have uh, the rules that they have to be compliant, towards, but the way in which they do that, they actually have a fair bit of freedom in terms of deciding how they meet those compliance obligations. So, for example, this shows up a lot when we talk about KYC requirements as part of an asset issuer's obligations. So some asset issuers, they interpret the legislation as requiring them to say have a physical photocopy of somebody's identity document on file in a filing cabinet in their office somewhere. And that's basically how their compliance team has interpreted the regulation for them to feel like they are being compliant. Whereas another asset issuer that's in the same industry is happy to accept a zero knowledge proof of somebody meeting certain eligibility criteria, say that they live in a particular jurisdiction or that they're above a certain age, but using this modern technology to essentially prove the same thing. And you can see that's quite a wide spectrum there. So that's definitely been a surprise for me. And I will say I've been pleasantly surprised by just how many customers have been open to the more novel approach or the more modern uses of technology that has all sorts of benefits for end users as well, especially over having a filing cabinet or a honeypot of data stored on a server somewhere. So that's definitely been one surprising thing about partners. And then could you repeat the second?
Yeah. Flowing on from that, like, and that is definitely a surprise that like we've seen as well, like these nuances to how people have different levels of comfort when it comes to security, or whether it's security for themselves and data, or security or compliance with regulations. But the second question was, are there things that you think that people uh, don't see or understand about what it takes to launch infrastructure like Redbelly?
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a lot there. I think the one thing that people may not appreciate, I've touched on already in this conversation, but is the amount of time and energy and effort and difficulty there has been in sort of getting to the starting point. So taking the great work that Vincent has done at the University of Sydney and with the CSIRO, and getting that to the starting point at which you can start to commercialize that technology. So this is a lot of legal work. It's a lot of trying to set up the joint venture, get all of that hard yard set up, then trying to capitalize the company to execute on the strategy that we've come up with. That's an enormous undertaking, and has been an enormous amount of work from many people for many years. And that's definitely something that I think a lot of people may not have thought about or have much insight into on our journey. So that's definitely been one thing. And then the other thing is, I think you would think most people have a degree of insight into this, but the degree of complexity of the technology and coordinating the development of many different complex pieces of technology in what is a very deep tech stack in the sense of, we've got everything from a novel consensus algorithm to an optimized version of the EVM, to leveraging zero knowledge proof protocols that others have developed in order to build our own verifiable credential data model, and trying to then manifest that as good a user experience as we can, through to trying to abstract all of that complexity then away for our customers, our asset issuer customers, so that they can easily integrate the amazing benefits of all of that technology coming together by offering them an easy to consume SDK or suite of APIs, so that they can easily and compliantly tokenize and issue the assets, just so that people can then come and buy them and invest in those opportunities. So it's sort of I think the goal is to make the experience and the consumption of the network so simple that people don't understand that there is that much complexity under the hood. And I think that's the point, is the more that complexity is exposed to people, it just shows how much more work we've got to do to make it even better and even easier to consume. So that's, I guess, what's sort of driving a lot of our product development efforts, is I'm trying to improve and abstract a lot of that complexity away as much as possible.
I think just on that point, like it's really interesting that it's not just the blockchain side and all of the, as you described, the complexities with different elements that you use, whether it's for making onboarding easier and abstracting that away, and just making it more like a Web2 experience, for example, or like using ZK proofs, which help protect data and help prove things around whether for security or movement of data. But it's also how you integrate into existing systems, because blockchain doesn't exist in a vacuum. It will still have to talk to mostly digital, but sometimes not so digital kind of systems, as we alluded to there. So leading on into that lessons for builders part, this, from an enterprise lens sort of thing, what do you think that people get wrong when building for, let's call them regulated enterprise use cases in Web3, folks that are looking to do that? Like, what are some of the things that you've experienced that could be done better?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people don't give enough emphasis to the idea of backwards compatibility into some of these existing systems that you've talked about. As I've tried to describe here, I think like we see the biggest opportunities in these existing industries, but with any existing real world asset in I guess industry, you've got a lot of existing systems that overnight people aren't just going to be able to swap out and change everything, because these systems are complex. They're integrated across multiple touch points and multiple integration points with other third-party systems. And so you really need to carefully consider where you're gonna, the goal shouldn't be to just completely replace the entirety of a customer's tech stack from day one. It's not, I think, in my view, unless you are very lucky and you found a very tight niche to focus on. It's not realistic to sort of rip out an entire old system and shove in a new one. And so for a period of time after launching a tokenized asset, for example, we expect a few customers to continue running their existing processes alongside it, just from a risk mitigation standpoint. And so that is, I think, definitely one thing.
But just from what you described there, with these parallel kind of systems, that is the reality of not just blockchain, but just any solution. Like, we work in AI. It's not like people, like, all of a sudden they start using our tool that they stop using every other system that they've got. No, so a lot of the time these things act side by side, and I think that's one of the realities that people need to understand, that yes, there is a great step forward when it comes to things being tokenized, because it's a clear sign that that company accepts this product as the way forward on their blockchain journey, which we know they're going to be in. So it's a good chance to get in early. However, when it comes to measurement of these things, whether it's like RWA XYZ, not really counting things unless as TVL, unless it's completely only on chain, which I would argue, how can anything really be only on chain when they need to have legal status, talk to existing systems, etc.? So I question mark a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But regardless of the TVL kind of argument, I think that it's really important to highlight just what you said there, because more folks need to understand this. Like, we're moving in this great direction that is going to be a tokenized future built on blockchain, smart with AI, but it doesn't just happen overnight. But there are great steps, and the projects that we've done so far with Redbelly, that the announcements of things that are to come as well are definitely a part of that. But going back to your experience, what are some of the similarities, or let's say key differences that you see between traditional product launches and that which happens in Web3?
Yeah, great question. I think that really, when it comes down to it, the product, the note, like your product value proposition should be enabled by the tech, the Web3 nature of the tech, but it shouldn't be defined by it exclusively, if that makes sense. So in that sense, at least if it's, unless it's a niche product targeting specifically like Web3 users for a specific Web3 thing. But I guess in our sort of application focus area of real world assets, is that the product launch itself, I would say, for the average builder, unless you're doing core infrastructure like we're doing, the traditional sort of like user-facing product launch, the value proposition should be the focus of the launch, rather than the technology that you might be using to do that. And I mean, we see this in AI as well all the time, that you get that sort of AI wash, or the blockchain Web3 wash of a product, but you'll always come undone if that's your only card that you're playing. Like, I'm using this novel tech and therefore this product's going to be amazing. It's like, no, it actually has to solve a problem for someone. So, and it has to be valuable. So in that respect, I think the traditional sort of like Web2 strategies of a product launch are definitely still applicable and valid in Web3. But one thing that Web3 has over Web2 is the community, and the communities that we build around our projects. And that is a key leverage point that I think any product person should be heavily leaning into, in terms of how can I, increase the virality of my product through leveraging the benefits of having an engaged community around your project. And I do think we're still scratching the surface in terms of how that can be done these days. I mean, especially with all the advancements in AI and how to distribute content and create content sort of like on the fly, and just making people aware of these opportunities is something we're still definitely scratching the surface on, and we're learning, like everybody else, how how to do that on the go.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing some great content, speaking of community, being created with AI and, with the skill of the creators out there. And it's really amazing to see. And yes, you're absolutely right. We're scratching the surface. The people that have come in, all these early adopters, there's going to be more of the mainstream coming in as they learn the name of Redbelly and see the projects that are being built on it. So it's really going to be interesting. Just before we round out and go to the community side of things, any hard-won lessons that you'd pass on to founders or other product leads working in the space?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I would say sort of a flavor of what I've said earlier in the conversation, be problem obsessed and problem focused, and try to focus on as painful and narrow a problem as you can when you're trying to launch something. You can always build more features to solve more problems as you go, but it's more important to move fast, and it's more important to get traction as early as possible than it is to build the most shiny or flashy product you can with as many features as possible, solving every possible problem that you can think of. And I think there's a temptation with the accessibility of these like AI coding tools that we have now at our fingertips, where we can build and iterate really, really quickly. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to build production grade software to test assumptions. And that's is, I think, something that the product as a discipline is grappling with, very, very rapidly, and has having to get used to very, very rapidly, is just the pace at which you're now able to test your assumptions and build proof of concepts and things is so fast now that there's no excuse to not be putting working software, even if it's in a proof of concept kind of level, in front of customers and users to test your assumptions as fast and as frequently as possible. So definitely lean into that. And yeah, I guess think that's it. If I think of something else, I will get you to edit this part of the recording and we'll add it in.
We can go back to it, yeah, for sure. Look, I think that there's some really great insights there, and just as it's been throughout the episodes, some interesting thoughts that you get to really say now that you've been in the space for as long as you have, and not just like researching or looking or investing, but being hands-on in terms of the building, which certainly is a unique experience. Now, from a product point of view and going over to the community side of things, how important do you think a community-driven events such as, say, hackathons?
Yeah, I mean, they are a crucial part. In fact, in my blockchain journey, where I got the most benefit and actually made all of the connections with people that kind of led me down this path were at hackathons specifically. I can think of two in particular that come to mind, where working on a really focused problem in a very, very tightly constrained amount of time is a great sort of furnace to really bake ideas and test things really quickly and just be creative. I think that's the biggest thing, is that you get permission to just to experiment and to go as take risks and go as wide as possible on any particular solution you might want to build. And having that permission, and as well as that, I guess, an incentive from a prize sort of perspective, really driving people forwards, it's always fantastic to see the creativity of people and all the different problems that you never thought or solutions that you never thought about before as in your day-to-day as a product person. But people having that opportunity to be creative, it's awesome to see what people come up with. So I definitely think hackathons in particular are awesome. And now you've seen that throughout our industry over many years. There's been some incredibly successful projects that have come out of started as hackathons, or as projects in hackathons, I should say. So I would definitely encourage anybody in the community to participate in hackathons and test some of the technology that we're building as part of that and push it to its limits. and you might uncover the next, billion-dollar project on Redbelly. That'd be awesome.
You never know. Like when people ask me like what is or how do blockchains work or what is Redbelly and all that, I'm like, you have to frame it in Web 2 terms. So it's like, think about it as like the cloud, the server, that's the AWS, it's the GCP for Google Cloud or Azure. And then they go, oh, and then apps get built on top of that. Yes. But the hackathons thing, interesting. You mentioned ETH, Ethereum community here, but like ETH Sydney, the group that's there, Bocky, Daniel, all those guys that are from the past. I was a judge at one of their hackathon events, so that was great to see. Really great ideas. We're pushing to see what we can do with hackathons with Redbelly, so watch this space. But then I just completed literally yesterday, last night, a hackathon, an AI hackathon.
Nice.
And to the point that you made there about it being this furnace from which you create these like really interesting baked goods, you could say. It really is. I hope that someone in the community creates some artwork based on the quote that you just said there. But you've seen what works well in the time that you've been involved, advising, researching, working in Web3 projects. What do you think are things that you've seen that work well, but also don't work so well when it comes to, say, trying to engage builders and contributors in Web3 projects?
Yes, good question. I think things that work well are making sure that you are aligned on the problem you're trying to solve up front. So if it's, I guess I'm trying to think of the different contexts that I can interpret your question, but let's say it's Redbelly working with a builder to solve a specific problem, and there's a grant, a community grant that's sort of on the table as part of that. You want to really balance the flexibility and creativity of the builder, like as the person who's actually going to build to solve the problem, with a targeted scope, if you like, of an area that you want to still ensure you're getting the right sort of outcome. So there's a couple of ways in which we try to do that at Redbelly. We look at on-chain performance, for example, for our asset issuers as a means to kind of distribute grants based on actual performance of the use case and the assets on the network, which is a really great way to do it. It kind of removes some of the subjective interpretation about meeting scope, I guess, requirements. So that works really well. Also, not assuming that you know the best solution up front, definitely. As I was kind of saying before, let people be creative, and you never know what they'll come up with. As long as the definition of the problem you're trying to solve is sufficiently detailed and granular, then the creativity can come on the solution side. And that's really important as well, I think.
I think that there's certainly been a lot of great lessons that people have had here, whether they are aspiring product managers in the Web3 space or otherwise, or just interesting insights from just the realities when it comes to bringing in frontier technology. It's just like, I feel like we're car salesmen in an era where the majority of people still, own and run horses. But we saw how rapidly things can change, especially when things are adopted and are as beneficial as cars were with paved roads and all that kind of stuff. And within 20 years, hardly anyone had horses. So we'll see what happens. We're definitely going to be bringing you back on for some more detailed insights, especially as more projects, products, and things get announced out there. We definitely need the product perspective. But for the first time that we've got you on as part of this Insights podcast series, Matt, Hale, thank you so much for your time, and we'll speak to you again soon.
That was great having the chat, Mark. Really appreciate it. Look forward to coming back.
Cheers.